Welcome to EPG Pathashala. Subject is Indian Culture. Paper Indian Epigraphy. Module Ancient Languages of Epigraphy. The main object of this module is to understand the importance and significance of Prakrit and its various ramifications and the closely associated languages like Greek, Aramaic and Sanskrit also. Earlier occasions, we have tried to understand the various scripts, and equally important is to understand the languages in which they are written. They are just like coins, two sides of a coin. Script and languages are equally important, then only we can try to know the real significance of an inscription. Earlier efforts were made, as you know, as students of Indian history. Indus seals still remained as an enigma because for the first thing, we could not decipher it because of lack of biscriptal, bilingual records. Even to this day, scholars are at it, first to understand the script in which it is written and the languages. Over the period of centuries lapsed, and only from 4th or 3rd century only we have real material. It has come in the form of inscriptions which are basically written in Prakrit language. Indian subcontinent, as you know, is singularly rich in epigraphs, and earlier scholars and epigraphists, they carried out intensive and extensive exploratory epigraphical survey, and due to their painstaking efforts, hundreds and thousands of inscriptions have been located and have deciphered from nook and corner of India, which are in different scripts and languages, and they belong to different dynasties and rulers which are far flung in time and space. So now an effort is made to understand the importance of language. A famous linguist and a scholar, David Diringer, observes the languages were written much earlier. There might have been existed many languages if you look into the ancient world. Because of lack of script, they did not remain and they have not come down to us. And with the discovery of invention of writing, the skill of art of writing, they could write, put things in the form different languages could be understood. Otherwise, many languages might have existed in ancient world. Because of lack of writing, because they have not come down to us, we don't know many of the languages which was in ancient world, and they might have disappeared in the course of time. And he defines the language as a graphic representation of a language. Today, we are in a position to read, decipher many early inscriptions, mainly because the earlier person could record them in prevalent languages and known and popular scripts. So even an ordinary subject could read, understand the important significance of the inscriptions. With the passage of time, more and more inscriptions started appearing, making the epigraphical canvas very rich. As you know, in the earlier phase, 3rd century or in the beginning of the Christian era, earlier Christian era, we have very few inscriptions. Barring the Ashokan rock edicts, very few Prakrit inscriptions have come, but with the passage of time, more and more inscriptions started appearing, and attempts have been made to decipher. With the diffusion of knowledge of the script and language, more and more inscriptions started appearing in different parts of India, and the nucleus have been identified, certain areas are identified, and they are explained down below. In the epigraphical horizon, the earliest language seen is the Prakrit. As we know, though Sanskrit existed, but as an epigraphical language, the first and foremost place is taken by Prakrit, because the fact that earlier the Brahminical faith was not that prominent, and the Jainism and Mainism, they made a major foray, and their ideas and religion and thoughts are to be conveyed in Prakrit. So a major part of the inscriptions are in Prakrit language. Of course, other foreign languages appeared simultaneously are the Greek and Aramaic, not only in inscription but also in coins. And here we can make a mention that this major, James Princip, it helped even in the decipherment, even in making a key for the Brahmi script because of the biscriptal and bilingual coins which have added in a great way to understand the Brahmi script. The earlier records in a foreign language discovered in India are those of Aramic, and they belong to the 3rd century BC. For the benefit of the subjects who are in northwestern part of India, Ashoka thought, it should be recorded in that language, in Aramic language. They were the people who knew, and Aramic script and language was popular in northwestern region, and that's how subsequently even Kharoshti script emerged. It is through Aramic script also. So, just for the benefit of the northwestern subjects, Ashoka got his edicts in Aramic as well as in Greek. They are found in northwestern region. Now, at presently, they are located in West Pakistan. The coins of the Indo-Greeks and other foreign rulers of northern Asia also bear the legend in Greek language, and this has richly enriched our epigraphical language. The bilingual Greek and Aramic Arab Mauryan king Ashoka was discovered in Afghanistan, which formed earlier part of Greater India. Now, Prakrit as an epigraphical language, as I stated, it was a popular lingua franca. Though Sanskrit existed, Prakrit dominated the entire scenario, at least from 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD in northern India, up to 4th century in southern India. We will just, as we proceed, we will see the periodization and the zonalization of both Prakrit as well as Sanskrit. We are given to understand that our history begins around 4th century BC. Normally, there are many scholars, they take it as 3rd century BC, but because of certain paleographical features, some of the inscriptions are even taken to 4th century BC, and normal today it is not in Sanskrit, but all the readable inscriptions are written in Prakrit language. Perhaps reason is not far to see if we try to attempt and understand the social milieu of ancient India. As I told, it was Buddhism and Jainism which predominated the earlier Christian era. Prakrit became lingua franca of the subjects mainly who were also followers of Buddhism and Jainism. The Prakrit age of Indian epigraphy continued from 3rd century BC to 2nd century BC. The 2 centuries are very important. As I told, barring the Ashokan rock edicts, there are, though a small group, but all we have Prakrit inscriptions. In Indian epigraphical study, the prevalence of Prakrit and Sanskrit as an epigraphical media has been broadly classified, and it falls into 3 categories which you are going to see now. The first is the Prakrit age, is starting from 4th century BC to 2nd century BC, and the Prakrit and Sanskrit age from 1st century BC to the end of the 3rd century AD, and the Sanskrit and Prakrit age from 4th century AD to so it's a predominance of different real languages, different times, and the vernacular Sanskrit. So these are the 3 categories which we see when we do the periodization and zonalization of the Prakrit as well as Sanskrit inscriptions which are in that language. Originally, the epigraphic language of the whole of India was mainly Prakrit, and Sanskrit is first noticed in the inscription of northern India from about the second half of the 1st century BC. Though, as I told, Brahminical religion slowly made its advent, and we have this. But northern India, the establishment of Sanskrit in place of Sanskrit was nearly complete by the end of the 3rd century AD. So Prakrit slowly ceased, and Sanskrit became a major language. But the suppression of Prakrit in the epigraphs in southern India took place much later, as late as the 4th century AD. The inscriptions of Prakrit are diverse and largely unstandardized because they doesn't fall in the grammatical limits, so they have their own local variations and dialects are seen. Among the Prakrit inscriptions in general, the earlier inscription The looser and more colloquial the language and the orthography are likely to be, although the Ashokan inscription constitute, in some respects, an exception to this rule. Though a small number of inscriptions, edicts are there, but they follow in certain pattern. In general, the Prakrits of Ashokan inscription represent a early stage of the development. When you look the development of Prakrit, so the Ashokan rock edicts, including the pillar, cave, rock edicts, they show the earliest stage of the development of Prakrit. The Ashokan inscriptions can be said to comprise three main dialects. To understand the Prakrit, we have to understand these aspects. The Ashokan inscriptions can be said to comprise three main dialects: the Eastern, the Western, and the Northwestern. Among the three Ashokan dialects, the Eastern dialect clearly predominates, as it was the local language of the imperial capital at Pataliputra. As you know, Magadha, the Pataliputra was the nucleus from where the main Prakrit emerged, and Ashoka employed the royal scribes who could move to different parts of India, but basically they were drawn keeping in mind the script that was prevalent in Pataliputra. The original versions of the edicts were drawn up in this dialect to be translated later into other dialects according to the regional requirements of the subjects. The majority of the Ashokan inscription, including all the pillar edicts, minor rock edicts, as well as rock edicts from Kalsi, Dhauli, Jaugada, Aragudi, are in the dialect, and in some of them it is obviously being used far beyond its original geographical ranges. So these are some of the features which we see of the Eastern Ashokan dialect, where we find the main features are predominant of La, masculine A, Lajine, instead of Rajine, it is Laja, like that we find, and it is also later phase, we call it literary Prakrit. It is also called as Ardhamagadi. In general, the Western dialect is one of the more similar to literary Pali and the later inscriptional Prakrit. It contrasts with the other dialects, especially the Eastern one, generally archaic aspects, phonetics and morphology. Example, Atmane Pade, like Karote, we find the usage in the edicts. When coming to the Western Ashokan dialect, we have the Girnar rock edict, also frequently differ from the other dialect versions, as we see, like Pashati, like as we have Pashyati, where in other Dakhati is Dikhati, and Pamtheshu instead of Mageshu. These are the regional variations which we notice in the Ashokan rock edicts. The language of the rock edicts of Shabasgari, Mansehra, which belong to the northwestern part of the Ashokan rock edict, is essentially an earlier form of the dialect which is nowadays known as the Gandhari, as we have called Ardhamagadi. Gandhari is also a style of writing which we find. The Gandhari, like all the records of Gandhari, these inscriptions are written in the Kharoshthi script, whose graphic peculiarities, particularly the absence of vowel quantity, tend to observe some of the features of the language. Now coming to the northwestern Ashokan dialect, the dialects of the two northwestern sets of rock edicts diverge in several respects, notably in the treatment of final R's. Thus, the equivalent of Rajnyaha, in genitive case, Shabasgari, you have Ragnyo. In Mansehra, it is Rajine, reminiscent of the eastern form Lajine. Northwestern Ashokan dialect. Now coming on the whole, the Ashokan inscription give a broad view of the dialect spectrum of vernacular, but it may also be understood that they do not provide anything like a real dialect map of the period, because of the period and the group of inscription, we are unable to make out the overall scenario of the Prakrit which was prevalent, but Ashokan dialect to some extent gives the real instant. On the whole, the Ashokan inscription give a broad view of the dialect spectrum from 3rd century BC, but it may also be understood that they do not provide anything like a real dialect map of that time. On the whole, there are very little remains of Mauryan period. Other than the records, we have all from the northeast. Most of them exhibit typical Ardhamagadi features. Some of these inscriptions, notably Mahastan, Saugora, seem to reflect more colloquial and archaic variety of this dialect. So, Prakrit of post-Mauryan phase. So, now we have tried to understand some of the forms and features of the Ashokan rock edicts, Prakrit usage. Now, let us see the Prakrit of post-Mauryan phase. After the Mauryan period, there is a major shift in the linguistic features of the inscriptions in Prakrit. What you note is the eastern dialect of Ashokan and other inscriptions of the Mauryan period ends abruptly. It is started that a single inscription in eastern dialect has been from the post-Mauryan era. In northern India, after the collapse of the Mauryan Empire and the movement of the center of power in northern India, political power in the following centuries towards the west to northwest, we find inscriptions in this standard epigraphic as well as Orissa. In the east, for instance, the Hathigumpha inscription, while in the south, we find in abundance, we have inscriptions from Nagarjunakonda, Amaravati, which are in Prakrit of early phase. So, now let us try to analyze some of the inscriptions where we see the influence of Sanskrit on Prakrit inscriptions, and similarly the influence of Prakrit on Sanskrit inscriptions and Sanskrit inscriptions of the earlier phase. It is interesting to note in this connection that the Besnagar, located in Bilsa, Vidisha district, Madhya Pradesh, is an inscription of Heliodorus, who hailed from Taxila in the Rawalpindi district of West Pakistan. He was an envoy of the Indo-Greek king Antelidias of last quarter of the 2nd century BC at the court of King Bhagabhadra Vidisha. These inscriptions exhibit some influence of Sanskrit and literary Prakrit. The influence of Sanskrit on Prakrit inscriptions and Sanskrit inscriptions, which we are going to see. As we know, the earliest phase, we find a lot of inscriptions coming from Mathura. A few Mathura inscriptions of the time of Shaka king Shodasha of the first quarter of the 1st century AD contains stanzas in classical Sanskrit and in ornate meters like Shardula Vikridita, Bhujanga Vijrimbita, while in Junagadh we have a few very good classical inscription belong to Shaka Rudradaman, is an excellent specimen of high literary Sanskrit. That is what we see. Essentially, the popularity of Sanskrit at the courts of the rulers, either of foreign or indigenous extraction, was due to the influence of grammarians. Classical Sanskrit was codified as a result of efforts of a number of early grammarians, the most outstanding among them being Panini of 5th century BC, who was an inhabitant Salatura in Gandhara region in northwestern India. The records of the kings of Satavahana family are all Prakrit, indicates that the influence of grammarians at the Indian courts were acting rather slowly. Earlier, the Prakrit ceased to exist in northern India in 3rd century AD, and it continued to some extent till 4th century AD in southern India. We have some inscriptions in Sanskrit, slightly influenced by Prakrit, belong to Indian rulers who flourished about the second half of the 1st century BC. One of the earliest inscriptions from Western India is Goshundi, Hathibada, located in Chittorgarh district, Rajasthan, epigraph of the king of Gajayana, Sarvatata, while the earliest such record in East India is the Ayodhya inscription of Dhanadeva, both of whom flourished in the same age. These are one of the few very earliest inscriptions which are written in pure, very good Sanskrit. The Sanskrit language as used in the earlier shows the influence of grammar of Panini was not fully established even in the central part of India, which was the home of its great commentator Patanjali of Gonanda as late as 3rd century AD. And another very important earliest Sanskrit inscription is from Jagatpur, brick inscription. Shilavarman performed Ashwamedha sacrifice to commemorate or to prepare altar. He got many bricks prepared, and there he has written the Ashwamedha performance of the Ashwamedha sacrifice, and he seems to have flourished about the end of 3rd century AD. They are all written in beautiful Sanskrit verse. By the time of the rise of the Guptas of Pataliputra near Patna in Bihar, 4th century AD, Sanskrit emerges as one of the important prime language. In successive period, it becomes a pan-Indian language seen throughout India. The celebrated dramatists Bhasa and Kalidasa flourished in their age, and the great epics and some sections of the Puranas appear to have reached their final form in the first half of the 4th century AD. The earliest inscriptions in southern India are a few records of the time of Ikshvaku, the successors of Satavahanas. They, apart from Prakritino, they produce a large number of Sanskrit inscriptions. Even in recently, Panigiri introduced, we got large number of Sanskrit inscriptions belong to Rudra Purushadatta, and here also we have earlier Chantamula record, which belong to 3rd century, and they have been, and so they produced early rulers of later Satavahan rulers produced Sanskrit inscriptions, and successively the Ikshvakus also a large number of Sanskrit inscriptions are found from different Buddhist sites and archaeological sites. But the Prakrit continued to enjoy the popularity at the courts of South Indian kings till 4th century AD is clearly indicated by numerous inscriptions. The records of the time of the Ikshvaku king Veerapurushadatta, who flourished about the 3rd century AD, but many of the records of Veerapuru's son Yahovala Chantamula, which may be assigned to 3rd century AD. And at the first of the 4th are written in either inscriptional Prakrit or in a language which may be regarded as literary Prakrit insofar as they reduplicated consonants. The language of the later group records like Vakataka Vindhya Shakti, we have these records written in Prakrit and subsequently, of course, written in good Sanskrit also. The earliest inscriptions of Salankayana dynasty are in Prakrit of the literary type. They may be assigned to 4th century AD. The 5th century records of the family are, however, written in Sanskrit language. It is also interesting to note that Matte plates of Damodar Varman, who ruled over this Guntur region about the close of the 4th century AD, are also written in Sanskrit. And coming to Karnataka, we have the earliest, of course, Kadamba kings who ruled over this region, did produce some early Prakrit inscriptions and subsequently Sanskrit inscriptions also. The latest inscription written in literary Prakrit and discovered in Kannada-speaking region, that is Chandravalli epigraph of the Kadamba king Mayura Sharman, is very significant, which belongs to 4th century AD. So the language of the Prakrit charters of the Pallavas. Coming to Tamil region, Pallavas, early Pallava charters, we have their charters written in Prakrit, but subsequently the Pallavas, of course, they started writing their charters in Sanskrit also, but the early Pallava charters are written in Prakrit. Mainly the Maidavolu and the Heradagalli are a very famous example to be cited, which belong to Shivaskanda Varman. They are written in literary Prakrit, but the legends on the seals fixed on them are written in Sanskrit. A Mangala passage at the end of the Hiragadayalli place is also written in Sanskrit language. Some of the early Prakrit inscriptions, such as Hathigumfa inscription of Karavela and the Nasik cave inscription, belong to 19th regnal year of Pulumavi, are written in Gaudiya style. The Piprava cave vase inscription of the 3rd century BC appears to contain a Prakrit stanza. There are some medieval Jaina inscriptions in Prakrit, like Gatiyala inscription of Kakkuka dated in 862. Specimens of Prakrit are also found in few medieval records in Sanskrit. Particularly, though you might have seen the King Bhoja employed some Prakrit language to write his major literary works, like the Dar inscription referred to above contains the Prakrit poem entitled Kurma Shartaka. It is written in Prakrit language. As we have seen above, Prakrit as an epigraphic language ends slightly compared to South India. In some early phase, especially 1st century BC, we find Prakrit influence on Sanskrit inscriptions. Similarly, Sanskrit inscriptions with Prakrit influence are seen. With the emergence of the Gupta Empire, Sanskrit takes the center stage, and Sanskrit becomes a pan-Indian language. Even in the south, Sanskrit continued as an epigraphical language along with other regional languages. So Sanskrit, of course, we are giving a separate attention to this, and these are some of the earlier Prakrit inscriptions which you are see, like Saugara inscription, where we have a pictorial description of the granary, three-arched hill and all, where the object of the inscription is to store the granaries and disperse and give grains to the, at the time of famine, flame, this it is a very important inscription. And Basaha rock edict of inscription, this is written in again Prakrit language, one of the minor rock edicts of Ashoka. And this Banavasi inscription of Pulumavi is also very important inscription, just to show a couple of inscriptions which are in early Prakrit language. And Bhattipurolu inscription casket is also important. These are only few examples to show that early phase how Prakrit was a very, very important language to be used not only in private purpose as a major lingua franca found throughout the Indian subcontinent. Thus, to summarize, Prakrit played a very, very important role from 3rd century BC to 3rd century AD in northern context, from 3rd century BC to 4th century in southern India, and there are many, many inscriptions that were recorded. And along with the Prakrit, during the Ashokan phase, we have already mentioned that how Greek and Aramaic also was used as a epigraphical language to convey to the local people of northern Western India, and Sanskrit takes a center stage from the Gupta period onwards, and it continued, though with the emergence of regional languages from 6th century onwards are there, but Sanskrit played a very important role. It continued as an important language all along the regional languages. It makes a very important thing. It continued in the medieval period, late medieval period, and in subsequent period. Thus, they have a very long history starting from 3rd century BC, especially from 3rd century, 4th century AD, whereas Sanskrit continued for many, many years, subsequent period, which are seen in many, many epigraphical records. To understand in more elaboration, in more ramifications of this language, I wish the students should go through the e-text given on this, and also the other aspects connected with this are also dealt in at length in the e-text and the references which are suggested. I thank you all for your patient listening. Thank you.